Thank you.
So it always starts with your thank you.
I like
So when I go to the shopping and do the self-serve, when they talk to me, I try to remember to talk back. I don't mean like when I was a child, I talked back to my parents.
So, as we were leaving last week, John, pastor guy, asked me about what we're studying. He said, "Oh yes, 13. Yeah." He immediately knew chapter 13 was a big issue, a difficult one to get through. So he loaned me this book. He went back and got this
Whoa.
book, and there's like 40 pages of this book devoted to chapter 13. I didn't.
Wow.
I
In depth. Mercy.
I didn't get through it, but this person's seems to have done obviously a lot of study on it, and his perspective seemed to be very much toward the idea that Jesus was referring to what happened in 70 AD, because he was talking about and most of what he was talking about was talking to his disciples about what was going to happen in their lifetime. See these things happen. Don't think this means I'm coming. I mean, that's a lot of what he's saying. It's like, he's not telling you when he's coming, but just the opposite. These are just beginnings of things,
All of chapter 13, they're saying is happening.
He indicates that there's eschatology in that, the end time things also, but it's mostly talking about things that will happen in their lifetime. They're going to see, they're going to see. People won't pass away until you see these things.
Didn't we conclude that last week, that they're a twofold thing? Or did we not? How did?
That's the direction we were heading, yes.
Okay. Was that thought?
So now we have someone else's input. No, someone else's input. His name is Lane.
Is he traveling in the correct
I don't know.
lane?
Is there anything you would like to say about what he said?
No.
Okay.
Oh, yes, there was one section I really liked. And that was, I kind of spoke to the whole panic that at least the United States goes into over environmental issues and, the sun and all like that. And he did speak to the issue of what I took away from it, not what he said, was that as things go south, so to speak, for mankind, they do as well for nature.
Yeah, these things are not just man-oriented. There's things that are happening.
Speaking of nature, did you hear that the coast of Alaska had an 8.2 earthquake?
No,
And they're somebody over there on the West Coast, they're concerned about a potential tsunami.
Oh my goodness.
Whoa.
I just heard that coming in.
That's a pretty strong
so
earthquake.
it must happen very, very recent hours.
Yeah, I mean,
Tsunamis
I think
don't take days to happen.
right. I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, remember back,
Wow.
you guys are all old enough, yeah. Remember back when was it? Was it the sixties, the 9.1 in Alaska?
Oh, no. I didn't know
Yeah,
that.
well, I know that you heard of it. I'm pretty sure it was a 9.1.
Whoa. Whoa.
What's that gonna do to all
Let me
that
see.
ice, you
Oh, I
know,
don't know.
Yes,
the ice, is that gonna all fall into the sea?
right.
Yikes,
Wow.
flooding, no wonder there could be a tsunami.
Sure.
So was there casualties involved? You don't know. That's
It
all you-
didn't get that far into it, so I'm gonna assume that offshore means there was really no
Yeah.
casualty and it wasn't a danger. Because that would, I mean, it would have been a much, I think,
Been much bigger.
bigger
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
hopefully there wasn't an Alaska cruise going along the coast there. Anyway. Um, Okay, yes, so there'll be many, it says in verse 8, it says, besides the nation against nation, kingdom against kingdom, there'll be earthquakes in various places. There will be famines and troubles. These are the beginning of sorrows, but watch out for yourselves, for they will deliver you up to councils. Yeah. Again, I mean, this is obviously talking about the disciples themselves. They're going to be delivered up to councils, I'm telling you. And that doesn't mean that, I mean, we all have the potential being persecuted in various ways. I don't foresee any of us being delivered before kings or or government agents, but they could, but probably not us, maybe our children. Anyway, I don't know. Nobody knows the timings of these things.
Right. So God the Father.
Then there's also the whole thing of there being going into synagogues and being beaten and what have you. But that seems that the Jewish people are much more. I don't see that happening in today's world. The Jews are not persecuting Christians per se. Maybe they do in certain ways in Israel or whatever. I don't know, but my opinion, yes. But
I'm sorry, I'm not paying attention. But I looked it up, 1964, on Good Friday, there was a 9.2 magnitude earthquake in Alaska. 131 people died. I remember seeing images, the street was like, a street would be cut and it would be like, because it dropped.
yeah,
And I don't know if it shifted this way too, but it dropped.
yeah,
And there was, I don't know. Well, I think here's a picture here. Looks like it's, if that's what I'm seeing, about the size of it, 5 feet tall and almost as tall as a person.
yeah.
So,
As tall as my mother.
And two of our
She was a
daughters.
your mother?
Said
I'm sorry.
almost as tall as a person, 5 foot. My mother was 5 foot. My aunt was 4'10", and my daughter's 4'11". So, what am I?
Wow.
Anyway,
So I'm sorry that now back to concentrating on what you're saying. I'm sorry.
Well, thank you.
oh. But it's curious that this whole thing of, but in those days, and he's talking about, and going on to verse 24, it said, but take heed, I have told you all things beforehand. He says in 23, talking about all these signs and the things that are going to happen. And then he says, but in those days, after that tribulation, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light. The stars of heaven will fall and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. So that certainly doesn't sound like what happened after 70 AD. Not to my knowledge, that I don't remember any of that happening.
I mean, I suppose, the sun will be dark. Could have been a eclipse, I guess.
Well,
But verse 26 says, and then they shall see the Son of Man coming in clouds
And
with
that
great power
certainly
and
didn't
glory.
happen.
that did not
And it
happen.
has not happened yet.
No.
It is our hope and what we look forward to.
And he, to our knowledge, hasn't sent his angels to gather the elect from the four winds.
Yeah.
So,
If all those things happen, then we're in big trouble. What
or
was
God's got just a different plan. for us.
yeah. Okay. So we're actually into reading this now. I might as well just keep reading it. So the Son come in great power, and then he will send his angels, and gather together his elect for the four winds, the farthest part of the earth and heaven. So that kind of completes the thought of that from verse 1 down to 27, really, because then he goes on to a parable. So does anybody have anything else to say about this first part of John 13?
I'd like it to happen tomorrow,
Tomorrow.
the gathering of the elect.
Mhm.
Well, there is a gathering of the elect at our house tomorrow.
Yeah, about 5:30.
There he is.
Hi,
Oh,
You have to know how hard I had to fight to get up here. It's
Oh.
one thing after another.
really?
So,
hey.
Very good.
How many did you leave in your wake?
oh, man. First it was Enrique, who I always have a delightful time talking to. And Enrique's going to seminary at Gordon.
Wonderful.
And he will be a wonderful teacher someday.
So
He will
that's
be
the
at
one down there
the
doing
table. Yep.
at the table
Tito?
with his,
No,
Two kids.
Enrique,
Oh.
the fellow who drives
No. No.
the truck.
no, the guy's gonna talk, oh, okay.
Yeah, he's a fantastic,
Hmm.
he retains everything he learns. So he and I have great conversations every week, so.
I think so.
So that's one of the reasons why I don't get up here, is because I'm chatting with him. Not that you guys aren't fascinating, but
Here we are.
But,
So,
but like in Mark 13, you are looking to the future and the hope of this young man.
oh, sure, yeah.
Whereas, most of us, we have a limited future.
Well, we're in the 70 AD tribulation.
so we had just gotten through the first 27, I mean, we just got through talking about the first 27 verses of 13, which is
Mhm.
where all that, the tribulation and all this is now. I was saying, did anyone have anything else to share about it? You're here, just as I said that,
Okay,
so.
can you give me a summary of where you've been?
Well, this morning we were at
No.
home.
Yeah.
My simple take on it is this, is that it describes events that took place historically, mostly around 70 AD, but that does not empty it of meaning for us moving forward.
Hmm.
I think the main meaning that I would take moving forward is don't look at temporal institutions as being permanent, but the kingdom of God is.
Right.
So, it's like, look at these big stones. They're all going to be thrown off of each other. And if you look at the history of Israel and the history of 70 AD, that's exactly what they did.
Yeah,
Was they took the equivalent of
Right.
crowbars and just one of the ways that they quote unquote destroyed or humiliated people was to take off the top level of stones. So they knocked each stone off of each other. The other thing that's cool, if you go to Israel, if you go to the underground tour, you see how big some of those stones were. They're tons. You
They were
know,
humongous.
it's amazing what Herod did to build that temple.
Yeah.
So it's understandable.
Sounded like they were like-
Those country hick boys who fished in Galilee come to Jerusalem, and they're like, goodness sakes, look at that.
Yeah, isn't this amazing?
Yeah,
Yeah. Yes, it looks amazing, but. it's not-
right, but it's not a permanent thing. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
And that's what we often think too. And I'm firmly American, but I know that America is not going to be what it is, you know, for forever. So we don't put our trust
Obviously
in
not.
that. Yeah. So, yeah, so that would be, you know, one of the messages that I would take out of it moving forward. But, you know, the description of the things that happened, it was horrible what happened in around 70 AD. The Jews led revolts in the 60s. And I think about 66 AD, there was a major revolt, and Rome doesn't deal well with, they deal very well with revolts. They put them down, and they put them down very strongly.
Hmm.
And they weren't anywhere near their decline. Rome wasn't. They were very strong at that point. So when
Yeah,
Israel said, we're going to revolt, they tore down the city.
yeah.
The whole city was knocked down.
So that's why Jesus warned to get out before it happens.
Yeah. And how hard it'll be for nursing mothers, you know,
Yeah,
to have to leave their homes, you know, when they see that coming. And there are many, I'm not convinced of this, but I don't say it because I don't believe it. I say that I'm not convinced, meaning I don't have certainty about it. I wasn't there, I don't know. And I haven't spoken with God about it, and I don't know what kind of answer he would give me. But there are many who say that the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD was God's vengeance for the Jews not recognizing the Messiah.
Could it be not vengeance, but I sacrificed my son so you didn't have to go to the temple anymore to sacrifice. Therefore, I'm taking away your means of, in your mind, sacrificing. And so you gotta somehow either reinterpret the Old Testament, or you gotta just accept Jesus' sacrifice.
Yeah.
I mean,
The ultimate
Like
sacrifice.
that.
so, I'm concerned, the thing I don't understand is, and I did started reading in the 20, in verse 24. But in those days after that tribulation, now that tribulation being the 70 AD, is that, or is that another tribulation that is coming? It says the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light. Now,
Now,
to my knowledge, that didn't happen physically. Was there some spiritual, if that was all 70 AD?
yeah, it's hard to interpret exactly what that would mean. I mean, you could interpret it in terms of, you know, that there's so much fire and smoke. I mean, we know what that's like because we have it happening out on the West Coast, right? That the sun is darkened and the moon won't give its light. You just can't see it.
Yeah.
You know, but I'm not opposed to having a cosmic interpretation of that either. So, and there are interesting interpretations. Again, I put these out there because they're there, not because I call you to believe in them, but because you may not have heard them before. There are some who see verses 26 and 27. And we as Christians, most of us see that as the second coming. But there are some who interpret that as Son of Man being not referring to Jesus, but referring to the Roman army.
But then in 27, it says, and then he will send his angels and gather together his elect for the four winds.
Yeah, and
And
in
who are
angels, as Duncan knows, angels is a
As
pretty,
messenger.
yeah, it's a slippery term
Yeah, it
that
doesn't
when we think of
necessarily.
it, you know, part of what we think of is we think, and Duncan's hearing this again, but is we think of greeting card angels. we think, oh, here comes all these baby-faced angels that are gonna save us. Well, angels are scary things. And so, angels can refer to messengers, it can refer to prophets. It has a number of different, there.
Yeah, I know, like in Revelation, it talks about he's speaking to the angel of the church, to the churches, and sending it's really, that's more of a messenger to the
Yeah, to
churches,
the
right?
angel.
Not
I mean, in that
necessarily.
case, it may even be the pastor of that church or the main
Yeah.
person of that church. But again, I don't come to those things with certainty. I mean, I hold them very gently and say, this could be a possibility. And
No.
She has
I
spoken.
think I know in scripture. Why do you say angels aren't nice? Why do you say angels aren't nice or something?
well, first of all, anytime you have an encounter with an angel, if you see them, what's the first words out of their mouth?
Fear not.
Don't fear, don't be afraid. Well, why would you be afraid if it wasn't scary?
There you go.
The other thing is, in Hebrew, there are at least two names for angels, and they're cherubim and seraphim. And the seraphim, I forget what the cherubim are, but the seraphim are literally those who are on fire. So the burning ones, that's what, so, I mean, imagine, if I came towards you and I was on fire, I'd be probably a pretty scary sight.
Mhm.
Right, yeah. Oh, I never knew that.
Mhm. But there are also, good angels. I think it's Matthew 18, perhaps, where it talks about the angels watch over the children. And in that case, I would think that that's, it's a much more positive view, but they can be scary.
Yeah. Okay. And that doesn't mean they're bad. They're
no.
God's messengers.
Yeah.
You said something about.
Yeah, right,
Yeah,
yeah.
they're not-
That's what I meant.
Matthew 18:10, there you go. I think that's the one.
Hmm. So, shall we go to verse 28 and read through 31?
Yeah.
The parable of the fig tree. Who would like to read that?
I can read. Now learn the parable of the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and puts forth its leaves, you know that the summer is near. Even so, you too, when you see these things happening, recognize that he is near, right at the door. Truly, I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. Did you say through 32?
I don't know what I said. Wherever this. No, I didn't. 31. Yeah.
Okay.
That's it. So again, this seems to indicate that those who are standing there are going to see all these things happen. We see lots of these things happening as far as, earthquakes and, persecution,
floods.
fires, all kinds of things happen all the time. There's people there was a warning about people saying they're going to be the Christ. And we've seen all of those things, and they continue to happen. That doesn't mean, and his big point is, that doesn't mean that it's time for the end. That's seems like one of the main things he's trying to tell his disciples, that you're going to see all this stuff, but that doesn't mean it's all over.
There's a great line in the song by Dire Straits. And the line is, it's kind of a throwaway line of the song too. It's two men say they're Jesus. One of them must be wrong.
One of the things that could be going on here, it's talking about, the Israel, I believe, is likened to a fig tree, and its branches are tender. Could it have both a near and a far application such that it being tender, in 1948, it became a nation again after thousands of years. And so and then it says, those who are of this generation, what generation? The generation that was alive when Israel became a tender fig tree again.
Yeah, but that's about to
Terminate
terminate,
that generation.
that generation's about to go away. So what do we do then? I mean,
Look up for your redemption draws now.
no, I mean, if they,
We can hope.
it's like there's been a lot of things people through the years said, well, this thing happened and therefore the Lord's going to come sometime really soon. And then he doesn't,
True, but there has not been a nation of Israel for
No, I know, I
long,
understand.
long, long.
I understand.
So
Yeah.
that certainly could be, should cause us to take note, I think.
Right. I don't think anybody's faith should be rocked if that generation totally passes away and he hasn't returned. Would you agree? Yeah,
Sure. How would we know, though, that every single one? We won't necessarily know, because someone could be born the day before that generation, so he starts and live to 100 and.
well, we're not gonna know.
I'm just saying.
We could all pass away before that.
Yeah,
I understand. I
That's
understand.
fine.
it certainly is one of the more viable interpretations that have come along, I think, but it was probably a little more believable 20 years ago when it was first presented. Or at least my hope was greater than I think it is now in that thought.
Or 30 years ago, 88, when it was 40 years after the
Yeah.
Mhm.
reestablishment of Israel.
Yeah, yeah. And there were people I remember the guy on the radio saying, if Jesus doesn't come at this, what happens if he doesn't? If he doesn't come then the word of God isn't true. And it's like, well, he didn't come, and
The word of God.
word of
Yes.
God is still true. In fact, he said
What
his
what he
word will,
forgot to.
his
insert
word will
was
not
2
pass
words,
away.
Or 3 words, my interpretation of.
Yeah, right.
Then my interpretation of God's word isn't
Oh.
true.
And that's a fact.
Which we've all run into that from time to time, so.
Guilty.
Okay. Somebody want to read 32 to the end?
Well, but that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. Take heed, watch and pray, for you do not know when the time is. It is like a man going to the far country who left his house and gave authority to his servants and to each his work and commanded the doorkeeper to watch. Watch therefore, for you do not know when the master of the house is coming, in the evening, at midnight, at the crowing of the rooster, or in the morning, lest coming suddenly he find you sleeping. And what I say to you, I say to all, watch.
Watch. Yeah.
Remain watchful.
Yeah. Be
And-
ready. Watch.
I'd say we're some of those all that he's saying too, don't you? He says, and what I say to you, I say to all. It's us too.
Mhm, mhm.
I think it's interesting, 32, not even the Son of Man, not angels nor the Son, but only the Father knows when that day and hour is coming. So are we not presumptuous in trying to detect that time? Right. It's kind of human nature, but it is a little presumptuous. Not even the sun knows.
And if we knew, if we really knew, well, okay, this, and this has happened, therefore, God, Christ is gonna come back at this time, our tendency would be to just sit back and get right when it gets a little closer.
Hmm.
Live our life the way we
Yes.
want, I think it's purposefully vague so that we watch and be prepared every day, because we don't know.
And
That's
let's
right.
face it, none of us know when our time is anyway.
Right.
So,
Boy, that's for sure.
It's kind of interesting that only some pagan astrologers knew the time when Christ was going to come. And the Magi who looked at the skies and discerned from the skies that a king was being born. None of the religious people figured it out.
Right, that's true, yeah.
Yeah.
In verse 32, it says, no one knows the day and the hour. And yet Jesus prefaced it above, take note of the summer that's near. And when you see these things happening, you know that it's near.
Mhm.
So yeah, gotta be careful about the day and hour.
but we should be
Near,
able to
not
know the
relative.
month and year.
I didn't say that.
But
I
near is
heard
so
somebody say
relative.
that back in '88.
I did too. That's why I said it.
Yeah.
And that's why I guess the scripture says, be careful what you hear.
But near is relative, and it tells us that God's time isn't our time.
Yeah. That's 1,000 years is a day. As a day is 1,000 years in his sight. Who are we to? But,
It seems to be
the
that,
idea is we need to be prepared.
Yeah.
We need to be, we need to
Be
be,
ready.
we need to
Be in
be,
God's word. Yep, be into the word.
and the parable here tells us that, and part of what you said reflects this, that we need to keep doing what we're called to do.
yeah.
Right.
I think it was Luther that said, if you knew that the apocalypse was going to happen tomorrow, if you knew that tomorrow was going to be the end of the world, what would you do? Luther said, plant a tree.
Plant a tree.
Well, that's probably something I
Which
would.
would tend to suggest, keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that
right.
is,
Right.
if that's what God's called you to do, then you should be, then God knows the beginning from the end, so you should be doing what God's called you to do, right?
Right.
Yeah,
You
live
go
as if
through.
tomorrow is the end, and even though it doesn't end till after you die, either way, we should be being obedient to God and doing what God has called us to do.
So I have a fig tree in my driveway that's full of fruit right now, so I'm like a little step ahead.
So you know what that means? Summer is near.
Summer's
Right.
near.
That's what it means. That's what
Yeah.
Jesus said.
Yep, yep.
What do you learn? Well, summer's near.
Must be true.
And he would be correct in that, wouldn't he?
Right,
Well, it's not just near, it's right on us.
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
But Israel's a little different than near, I'm sure.
I wonder what y'all think about verse 34. He's put his slaves in charge, assigning to each one his task. But he's asking the doorkeeper to be on the alert, as opposed to the slaves being on the alert.
Could
It's
that
part
be
of what I
Euclid's
take
down?
away.
Would that be?
It could be, yeah, could be.
I think back in Nehemiah, where the wall was being built, weren't there some that were on the wall watching for the enemy, and then there was a bunch of others
Yes.
who had their weapons, but they also had their instruments to build the wall. So,
Hmm.
you know, we all have a part to play, and some are doorkeepers and are watching. Not that we all shouldn't be watching, but
Yeah, it kind of sounds like duty of the elders. Yeah.
Well, yeah,
those
he's,
who.
he's speaking these words to his disciples.
Mhm.
So it's not to a crowd that he's
Right,
saying these things.
right.
So it's kind of a
So
matter
he
of
says, watch
focus.
therefore, it's it,
Yep.
and commanded the doorkeeper to keep watch, and then he turns it to them and says, watch therefore. He's talking to his disciples that, you know. Yeah.
right, the key seems to be the master of the house is coming. Don't know when, but we're called to watch.
Right. And not only that, but while we're waiting and watching, according to the parable of the vineyard owner, we're supposed to be multiplying our fruit and our talents too. Not just
Absolutely.
sitting on them, right?
Right,
Mhm.
right.
Not just sitting and watching, but
No.
That's for sure.
working,
Yeah.
using what's
Prepare-
given to us for the kingdom.
Mhm. There's another interesting interpretation that you can take from this, and this is interpretation and application. One of the things that you get in the book of Revelation is that no empire will stand. You know, they go through the different empires and talk about how they all fell. This too will fall, is what he's saying to the disciples. And if you think about it, he's also saying this too, or the one before this fell. Don't put your trust in this, even your own, the faith that I'm coming from, Jesus, you know, Judaism, has had its ups and downs. And they've built on false premises and been destroyed. You know, if you think of the progress of the Israelites was, in the Old Testament at least, was Exodus, where they're taken out of slavery, to their apex is kingdom, with especially King David. And as soon as King David sins with Bathsheba, it takes a turn downward and continues downward until until their temple is destroyed and they're kicked out of the land, basically. And so that temple, which they held in high esteem, was destroyed. And this one too will be destroyed. The articles of your faith or the articles of your religion may be destroyed. But have faith, because Christ is still present, Christ is still coming. And so even in our time now, where it seems like everything that we hold sacred has been discarded, which is kind of the definition of exile, we continue to live and to take our cues from the Bible to say, how are we then to live? And we're to live out our faith, even when our religion is not at the top of the pecking order. So with the fall of the temple, it didn't end Judaism either.
For sure.
But certainly their place of worship was, and the high point of their worship was gone. Another way to look at that temple is the temple was no longer necessary because Christ is the temple.
Right.
Yeah.
And
what
we are his temple.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
right. And what does that mean? What does temple mean to a Jewish faith? Temple means the place where heaven and earth connect. The place where God is close, where it's a thin place between heaven and earth. And in fact, the Holy of Holies was the place where you could actually encounter God. And it was the closest to heaven you could get. There was less of a sense of, you know, I have to take a rocket to get to heaven, and more of a sense that heaven was available, but at its closest in the temple. And so Jesus takes the temple and says, it's not a place, it's a person. And then when Jesus goes, we become the body of Christ. And so we as the church should really take seriously that we are intended to be a thin place where people can encounter God.
Wow,
Oh,
what a challenge.
What a challenge, that's right.
Yeah,
Quite the responsibility.
yeah.
Yes, yes.
Mhm.
When it says the master of the house, does it mean, and we always assume that means when the Lord returns, but something of what you're saying there sounded like we're just watching for those things that could break down our relationship with God.
There's certainly a double meaning in verse 35. There are many meanings, maybe two or three. There's at least one. At least one of them means the master of the house is the Roman Empire.
Hmm.
That's whose house they live in right now.
Hmm.
And so watch therefore, and if you take that passage as, which it's remarkably like, if it's not actually speaking about 70 AD, it's remarkably similar to it. And the other is that Christ is coming. And I think that's more of the interpretation that we would take as far as a future interpretation of this passage. And your question again was should we be,
When it talks about the master of the house, is it talking about Christ coming back? And you did answer that.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
I think everything that we receive in scriptures points to a second coming of Christ.
I hope so.
Yeah, well, yes, but this particular passage might have other kinds of thoughts in terms of,
An interpretation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and his parables, some of them, I think you can take more allegorically than others. So I'm always careful about how much allegory I add to parables.
yes.
But his topic here, at least seems to be that destruction is coming. And you don't want to be around when it happens, so keep watch, and when it happens, get out.
Hmm.
And I'm certain that they came back because, after the fall of the temple, it wasn't like Christians abandoned the Jerusalem or the Jews, but they were dispersed. I mean, part of what's happening with this is a disbursement. And we as human beings are very resistant to being dispersed.
Yes.
And we have been since the beginning of time. God said, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. What did we say? Well, let's build a city so we won't be scattered around the face of the earth.
Yes, and a big tower. too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Mhm.
That's not quite what I told you, but
Mhm.
and the same thing happens to a certain extent with the persecutions. If you read the book of Acts, when is it that the church spreads out? It's when they get persecuted.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
What program are you working with there?
This is online Bible.
Oh, nice.
Its name is kind of deceiving in that this is long before the internet, so it has nothing directly to do with the internet.
Oh, okay.
This is an actual program.
Well, online before the internet used to mean just online as far as you can get it on your computer, I think.
Yeah, but that's, again, before computers, I mean, I had the old thing, and my first Bible program was on a floppy. And would have been I don't think it had anything to
200
do
years
with-
ago, you said?
Yeah. I age well.
Welcome, Mrs.
Back in
I
the
don't
dark
think it really
ages.
has directly anything to do with it being online. I don't even know how it got its name, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
We have some big fat books down in the library in church that were before the internet.
Oh, yeah. Yes, we do.
All the info is in there.
I really like this. Very inexpensive.
Mhm.
First time you buy it, it's, I think, like $35 or $40. And then as technology increases, and you can put it on all of your computers. But then if you buy a second one, it's $25 after that. It's just,
Moving back to these scriptures, as I look to the end, I think that there's maybe a message to us as well. In that these are all things we need to do because we're going to die and come face to face with the Lord.
And none of us know the hour when we're going to die. Right. So it's, in a sense, he's coming for us.
We need to be obedient to his word and listen to him. Yeah, go with his will and his plans, not ours, and be alert.
So it is 10:25. We're at the end of chapter 13. If there's anything else anyone wants to say about chapter 13 before next week when we go to 14. And 14, we're going to start down the road to his death and resurrection. So, prayer. We need to pray for Carol.
Yep.
We need to pray for Doug. He still has problems with his jaw.
Getting somewhat better or not?
No,
Not really?
it's getting better, it's getting worse.
Ooh,
You hit yourself in the jaw?
No, it just, I was clenching my teeth, I was mad over something, and just, something snapped in here, and it just, it seems like the jaw's out of alignment, you know, the teeth aren't matching up. I can't even chew at all, I can't eat food, and I drink with difficulty, I can drink, but with difficulty. It's painful. If I eat something even soft, it's painful, terrible painful.
And you're sure it's not your teeth?
No, but I visited the doctors this morning. They said it wasn't the teeth. I was off the dentist yesterday. I've been to all kinds of doctors and dentists and I can't do anything. Nothing.
Soup it is then. It's tough. Okay, for our second praise gathering tomorrow evening. That people will be blessed and that we won't wake up the neighbor's baby with our singing if she goes to bed before 8 o'clock.
earlier she applied the gathering of the elect in Mark as they were elector gathering at their house
Yeah,
tomorrow night. It's very clever on her part.
Nice.
The near application to
Yes, yeah,
perhaps
right.
a far understanding.
So how big was your group last Friday then?
It was not last Friday, it was several weeks ago. Which is-
About
Oh,
10,
yeah.
12?
Yeah.
How many?
Yeah, about 10, 12.
Somewhere around there.
And it was raining. It was a good size group for our living room. We could have held more, but
Well, that's a nice opportunity, certainly.
I've mentioned Amy in the past.
yes.
She had a very tricky, important surgery, I think it was yesterday. I get my days all mixed up, you know, I'm retired. 12 hours, and it looks like it was, don't know what success means. I know
Yeah.
she needed it, but it was, at any rate, it sounds as positive as it could be.
Say 12 hours?
Mhm.
That was the length of the surgery?
Oh, yeah.
She went in for surgery at 9 o'clock, and it was, he updated us, the husband updated people late in the afternoon and said that they were expecting it to go 12 hours.
Oh,
When that's all said and done.
That's a long time under anesthesia.
oh,
Oh, I'm glad those people didn't have, 8-hour workdays. Shift's over.
Now, I suspect an operation like that, you have a lot of different things involved, so you'd have one set of surgeons that do this thing and one that does, so it's not necessarily, hopefully it's not a doctor doing 12 hours of surgery. That would be difficult.
Yeah, you probably have one doctor that's kind of the overseer, kind of like the general contractor, and then a lot of specialists that come in. And I wouldn't be surprised if they shifted out the general contractor, because you don't want doctors who are in there who are fatigued.
Hmm.
No.
Yeah, like, yeah, somebody probably specializes in nerves
Mhm.
and some muscles and some, blood flow and all those things that are having to be cut, so, yeah.
In my most recent stint as a chaplain, we had a patient from the ER go to the OR. And I don't usually watch, but there was a screen like that that showed the OR, and that's exactly what you saw, was just one doctor, then another doctor, then somebody else steps in, and a bunch of people standing off to the side, and I would guess there were between a dozen and 16 people in that OR who were doing one thing or another.
What a team, huh?
Yeah, oh yeah, you had a team doing anesthesia, you had a team that was, was working on
Amazing.
bone stuff. It's just amazing how many folks are working in there.
But specialists in each area, that's a good thing.
Specialists and their assistants.
And their assistants.
Yeah, so I mean, it's not just one, it's
Hmm.
Right.
Hmm.
That would be a great illustration to help a church that's struggling with unity.
Hmm.
Just think if these guys were arguing amongst themselves. No,
Right.
it's your turn. No, it's my turn. No, it's, yeah,
Right. Don't use that instrument.
Yeah.
Use this one.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that
Yeah.
poor person on the table, i.e. a lost world, why the body of Christ.
Well,
doesn't
that's their
work.
one focus is helping that person.
Mhm.
Right.
And the church should have two focuses, one
Yeah.
this way and the other this way.
Mm.
And
And I work a lot with trauma too, and same thing with trauma. It's little space, but there's oodles of people and they're working.
Hmm.
And, I can be somewhat cynical, but after seeing what they do in there, I'm not cynical about doctors quite as much as I
Oh, I
used to
know.
be.
When you think of Bill, even Bill Enos, I mean, he just had surgery on his neck and the incision is this big right here.
Ah, wow.
Amazing. And they worked
Minimal.
on the back of his neck in the little incision like this.
That's
I mean,
amazing.
I
That's
so
fantastic.
admire these men.
major surgery.
speaking of something that's
That's amazing.
oxymoronic to me. Over here, through here.
I know. And
It's
how
like
do
I'm
they
going to
get
China.
around there? Right.
No, I'm gonna go this way.
I know. Tony had the same thing. They
Mm-hmm.
worked on his heart valve through his side. And I remember saying to the doctor, well, his lung is in the way. How do you do that? And he said, "We have
They
our
found a
ways."
way.
A lot of
I
those
saw
come
it.
through the groin. I mean, it's just amazing.
Yeah,
Yes.
through the
Yes.
groin. Yeah, and that too.
I
And that-
so admire these people who, are so courageous, I think, to learn those
Okay.
techniques. And
But what blew me away was their value of life. You know, you almost
Yes.
think that a doctor would become calloused and say,
Mhm.
well, oh, lost one.
Yeah.
There's none of that.
Right,
Yeah.
that's
Oh,
right.
they work so stinking hard.
Yep.
Mm.
And they don't ask you about your life.